Welcome back to Old School Sports and our OOTP 23 playthrough of the Pittsburgh Pirates. We are at the start of the 2041 playoffs, and for the second time in 4 seasons as general manager of these Pirates, we will be a participant in the playoffs. Had a 93-69 record this season, 4 games behind in the NL Central, but we did end up in the second wild card spot. We had a flat foot tie, 93-69, both us and the Mets with the same record. We also split the season series with the Mets, 3 games each. But they have won the coin toss, I guess, to get the home field advantage for this wild card series. So the Pirates will be traveling east to New York to see if we can take on the Mets. Hopefully win 2 out of 3 games. Both of the pitching staffs on these teams are pretty good. Their pitching staff was even better than ours this year, but our offense a little bit better than theirs. I guess instead of just talking about this, I could actually show you those statistics. We were 6th in the National League in runs scored, 5th in runs against. The Mets were 10th in the National League in runs scored, but 3rd in runs against. So hopefully we can win this series against the Mets. You may remember 2 years ago when we were in the playoffs for the first time as the NL Central winners in 2039. We got swept 3-0 despite having the home field advantage in the NLDS. So hopefully we'll do a better job this time around. And we have updated our playoff roster. Going to go with 12 pitchers and 14 position players. Going with 12 pitchers meant that we cut Edgar Flores. He will not be on the postseason roster. He is an incredibly dynamic pitcher. You can see he's got 3 good to excellent pitches. He has incredible stuff. He's a fan favorite, but he also has horrible control. Just were too worried about him potentially coming in as a reliever in a big spot and giving up a walk at the time when we just couldn't afford to do it. You'll see in 58 1/3 innings this past year, he did walk 48 batters, which is an insane number. Now he also had 108 strikeouts, 202 batting average against. You look at the course of his career, though, and he's progressively striking out a more insane number of batters every year. But the number of batters that he walks per 9 innings has also pretty much generally increased over the course of his career. So just felt that he was too unpredictable to potentially have in a big spot. Going to have an interesting decision for him this offseason. He made a little over $2 million this year. Probably will make a little bit over $3 million next year if we want him back. As I mentioned, he is a popular player, but we're kind of far enough into his career now where he's experienced enough that he's kind of a average-ish relief pitcher who walks 2 batters every 3 innings, essentially, even though he does strike out an insane number of people. I don't know that we can afford to bring him back at $3 million plus for next season. May look to move on from him in the offseason. I mean, I think the fact that he doesn't make our playoff roster tells us that for a team like the Pirates, probably going to be pretty difficult to convince myself to be paying him over $3 million next year. And opening up the extra spot on the roster by going to 12 pitchers means that we were able to have an extra bat on the team. Ignacio Carbajal, our utility center fielder, only had 100 at-bats this year after being our starter each of the past 2 seasons. Didn't hit all that much, but does have a nice glove, so wanted to make sure he was on the team. And Alfredo Velasquez, you may remember, we picked up last offseason in a trade, ended up having him spend most of this year in AAA, but did bring him up in September. The reason we've got him on the roster is right here with his home run power. He did hit 3 home runs in 44 at-bats at the major league level this year, 12 home runs in 236 at-bats as a rookie for the Phillies last season. The thought is that a bat like Velasquez, if we do need to use him as a pinch hitter, he is absolutely the type of guy who might luck into a big home run for us. Other than that, no real surprises in the lineup. In the roster, I'd say the one that might be a little surprising to some people is that our captain personality, Flavio Avanzi, did not make the roster. I'm not sure what not having that captain personality is going to mean and impact us in the playoffs. I know it's generally positive to have someone on that team throughout the regular season, so it's probably not optimal, but just not much of a hitter and a decent, good, but not exceptional glove. And we just didn't use him that much. He was literally up the entire season this year, played in just 30 games, only one start, and had 26 at-bats. Did hit 346 in that very tiny sample size, but he's just not somebody that our manager has chosen to use. So we figured we'd rather go with the glove of Carbajal and the potential for Velasquez to maybe come through with a big dinger for us at some point. Taking a look at our pitching staff, feel real good about our four-man rotation we're going to have for the playoffs. And Bobby Gonzalez, who was our fifth starter, is going to move into the closer role. So hopefully that'll mean that we've got a pretty solid bullpen. The only kind of guy who looks a little questionable as far as the statistics is Heriberto Rosales, who was a starter for us for a good chunk of the year. Haven't had too much of an opportunity to see what he can do in the pen, but felt better with him potentially as a reliever because he's just got much better control than Flores does, and in a big spot or even not in a big spot. If you can get a hit off us and beat us, we'll tip our cap to you. If we walk in a big run because our pitcher just doesn't know where the ball is going, I don't feel as good about this. And you can see we've got a pretty good staff as far as control. Luis Longoria is the only guy who's a little below average, and he's actually going to be our game one starter. The brilliant rookie has better control than Flores, and everything else is better than Flores too. He has got electric stuff. 10-2 with a 2.71 ERA, 207 strikeouts in 146 innings. He's only 23 years old and he's already fragile. So who knows how many pitches this guy's going to have in his body. We are going to bump his pitch count up to 100 for the playoffs. Let's see what we can get out of him. Actually, I think in our last episode, and it might be the episode that I lost and had to replace, but I want to say we had Longoria at an 80 pitch count during the regular season, and I bumped him up to 90, and now I'm bumping up to 100. But actually, I can figure this out, although it's probably been... Now, he did pitch 92 pitches 5 days ago, so that makes me think he was at 90. So we'll see. We're in the playoffs now. Who knows when the Pirates are going to be back? So we are going to put him on a bit longer leash than he has been on. So excellent pitcher on the mound for the Pirates, making his postseason debut in Luis Longoria. And for the Mets, Willis Cabello. 9-10 record, led the league with 86 walks, but he did strike out 280 batters in 215 innings, 3.98 ERA, 2.71 Sierra. Previously was an all-star with the Cardinals, it looks like, back in 2039. He's also fragile, but he is 29 years old, and he's a Elmont, New York native, so didn't have to go too far to get to Citi Field for this playoff series. So Luis Longoria for the Pirates as we try to hopefully win game one of this series and put a lot of pressure on the Mets. And unfortunately, looks like they got to our bullpen. Cabello got the win. Andy Ochoa in relief got the loss. A lot of home runs for Pittsburgh that went to waste in this 9-5 loss. Juan Canseco, who we picked up before the trade deadline, Chris Gomez, center fielder Ramon Herrera, and the rookie right fielder Alex Perkins all hit home runs, but was not enough to do it. Longoria was borderline respectable with 4 earned runs over 6 2/3 innings, did strike out 12. Ochoa came on, didn't get an out, gave up a hit and a walk, allowed 2 earned runs. Omar Gaona then looks like he walked the only batter he faced on 10 pitches, which is pretty brutal. And then Helton came on, and he was pretty sloppy in relief also. So it was not an optimal performance from Longoria, but it was much better than the performances that we got from everybody out of the bullpen. Longoria sets the Pittsburgh Pirates playoff game record for strikeouts with 12 in the first postseason appearance of his career. You can see that we were in pretty good shape. We had taken a 4-2 lead, and then they scored 7 runs on us in the bottom of the 7th to completely turn those win probabilities from about 80% for Pittsburgh to about 98% for the Mets in the span of half an inning. So a rough game for Pittsburgh. Wanted to get off to a good start, and now our backs are against the wall. We've got Ricky Gotti on the mound, 14-11 record, 3.34 ERA, 5.8 WAR. I believe he was third in the National League among pitchers this year, 2.87 SIERA, 72 FIP minus. So we've got a horse on the mound for us, and we're going to be going up against a pretty experienced pitcher, though. 38-year-old Cassius Thomas, 12-10 with a 3.57 ERA. But you can see he's had a big career. We faced him a few times in the playoffs back when we were general manager of the Kansas City Royals, because you can see he spent a lot of time with Boston, the Angels, and then the Yankees before finally recently coming over to the National League. Pretty experienced pitcher who's won 133 games over the course of his career, wrecked physically now. We've got to win this one. That's all there is to it. And unfortunately, the season is already over for these Pittsburgh Pirates. We were swept out 3-0 in the playoffs 2 seasons ago, and now we were swept out 2-0 in a wild card series this year. So although 2 playoff appearances in 4 years, with the Pirates having the lowest or second lowest budget in payroll in baseball, is not a bad accomplishment. The fact that we are now 0-5 in our 5 playoff games is not really all that great. We got home runs again, which is crazy. Another home run from Juan Canseco. Alfredo Vasquez, who, as I mentioned, we wanted to have on the roster, hoping that he might hit a home run for us, did get one. And then Isaiah Hill, who had a brilliant season for us, hit 2 today. But the pitching obviously let us down in this series. Gotti, 6 hits and 4 walks, 5 earned runs over 3 innings. Helton tried to stabilize things. Areneles got lit up. Macias didn't help the case. Gaona did strike out his only batter that he faced. And then Rosales was fine, but by then it was kind of out of hand. Took a 1-0 lead, promptly gave it back, and we were down 5-1, closed the gap to 5-4, and then the Mets bounced right back to get to 7 runs. We did get a run in the 9th, but it was not enough. And a promising season for these Pittsburgh Pirates is unfortunately at an end before the calendar is even turned to October. So with our season over, you know what time it is. Time to take a look at our top and bottom performers from the season. The starting rotation was excellent. Tony Machuca is going to be one and done with us. Went 5-2 with a 3.61 ERA after we traded away a few prospects to pick him up at the trade deadline. Hoping he would get us to the playoffs, which he did help, but also hoping he would help us in a long playoff run. Unfortunately, since we were in the battle with the Mets for home field in that playoff series, he was pitching in one of the final 2 games of the year and never even got an opportunity to pitch in the playoffs for us. So a bit of a bummer there. Luis Longoria, we just talked about before the playoff game, although he didn't quite get the job done in game 1, still has a huge future for us. Probably, going to get some votes for Rookie of the Year, I would imagine, for the number 11 prospect in baseball, who is now a full-fledged major leaguer. Ricky Gotti, the only potential issue with him, he had another good year, 14-11, 3.34 ERA. Obviously was not an optimal performance in the playoff for us. He is heading into his final arbitration season, expected to make about $10.5 million. Going to be difficult for us to bring him back at that number. You can see salary situation is about $70 million, going to be going up about $30 million next year. So we're going to have to find some money to cut. And Gotti at close to $10.5 million is one option. Andy Ochoa as a $6 million reliever is another guy who might not be back. Shortstop Luis Linares in line for a raise to about $8 million. Going to be difficult. Chris Gomez, first base / third baseman, making about $4.2 million. No guarantees that he'll be back. Edgar Flores, we talked about at the beginning of the episode. Hard to imagine we're going to bring a reliever who didn't even make our playoff roster back for close to $3.5 million. Willie Arenales at $3.5 million is a decision, but like him better than Flores. He's younger, and he's also a left-handed pitcher, so he'll probably stay. Ramon Herrera, who was our center fielder this year, in line to make about $7 million. No guarantee that he's going to be back. So we're going to be losing some pretty significant players off this team next year. Now, the hope is that we will get a bump in our budget, which will allow us to bump the payroll nicely. And we may get into a situation where we have to pare back on our scouting and development budgets just to kind of try to keep the core of this team, particularly Gotti, together for at least one more season. But it's going to be a different looking roster next year, that's for sure. Tony Santana is one guy who we know will be back. We did sign him to that long-term extension. I guess a 12-12 record with a 3.38 ERA and 238 strikeouts in 208 innings is maybe a down year for him. I mean, he didn't have a winning record, but his 4.1 WAR was the highest of his career. His 2.88 Sierra was the best of his career, so I don't think we can call it a down year. Wins, as many know, is not necessarily the perfect stat for how successful a pitcher is. And then Bobby Gonzalez, we've got a player option on the veteran who went 13-11 with a 4.51 ERA. Will definitely be accepting that team option. Who knows whether he'll accept the player option at $4 million for the year after. I would tend to think probably not. I think he can make more on the open market, but that's been a big-time contract for us. So although we'll be losing Machuca, if we do decide to pay Ricky Gotti in the neighborhood of $10 million, that'll still mean that we've got Santana, Gotti, Longoria, Gonzalez, and potentially Heriberto Rosales to slot back in as our number 5 starter. So we'd think that we're going to have a pretty good rotation once again next year. Greg Gaylord, although he did get bumped out of the closer role for the playoffs when Bobby Gonzalez moved to the pen, had a really nice first season with us. 8-9 record, 44 saves, 3.56 ERA, and 126 strikeouts over 93 and 2/3 innings. Andy Ochoa, as I mentioned, could be a casualty this offseason. 4.92 ERA. He looks better on paper than he performed this year, but he has been pretty successful for us as a reliever in the past, has been our closer from time to time, fan favorite. He's going to be a difficult decision in line to make, about $6 million. I think we probably have to move on from him because of that number. But if so, we probably can get something pretty interesting for him in a trade, because there may be some teams who still would be willing to try him as a starter. Elijah Helton, nice year out of the pen. He should be back with us next year. The arbitration number is about 2.5, so starting to get expensive-ish for a reliever, but a 2.42 ERA over 85 and 2/3 innings with the other pitchers, Ochoa, Flores, Gotti, Arenales, that we could conceivably be losing. Would have to think that Helton will be back. Hugo Macias, our free agent signing last offseason, probably one and done. If we could get him back for kind of that 1.6 million-ish number that he made this year, he could definitely be in the mix, because he was very effective with a 2.69 ERA and 115 strikeouts over 83 and 2/3 innings. Issue is he's going to be 36 years old in a few weeks, or a couple months actually, and he's looking for a $7.5 million a year contract over 4 years, so unlikely that he'll be back. Arenales, we mentioned, his number for a reliever, $3.5 million, starting to get pricey for the Pirates, but he's been pretty effective for us the last couple years, one of our few lefties. Tend to think he will be back with us next year. Rosales, not a great year, but a respectable number 5 starter, and only going to be making around $2 million next year, so think he will probably slot in as our 5th starter. And then we'll have another choice with Omar Gaona. His number is going to be a little over $2 million. The issue is we just don't ever really use him all that much. And as a lefty specialist, given that that's kind of his one job on this team, his performance, when you look at his ERAs and until this past year, his whips haven't really been all that impressive for a guy who should be a shutdown pitcher against lefties. So the good news is that I think we can probably bring the core of our starting rotation back. As I mentioned, Machuca's going to be gone. I'm sure he's looking for an insane contract. Yeah, $38 million a year almost over 5 years. So that won't be happening, but at least we'll, I believe we'll be able to give him a QO. No, I guess because we traded for him right before the deadline. That's unfortunate, but Machuca will be gone. But as long as we bring Gotti back at around $10 million a year, we can basically keep the rotation intact. So that makes me feel a little better, because as we talked about, between Ochoa, Flores, Macias, and even Gaona and Arenales to an extent, our bullpen could look very different next year. But I feel like if we've got the starting rotation largely intact, that's 80% of the battle with your pitching staff. Well, maybe not 80%, but more than 50% with these guys who can go out and pitch 6 or 7 innings every 5th day for the most part. And turning to our batters, Ron Holloway will likely be one and done. Hit well, 270 batting average as our backup catcher this year, but he just turned 34 years old. He'll be turning 35 towards the end of next season. Probably looking for a pretty decent extension. Only $1.6 million. I guess there is a chance we could potentially try to bring him back. The only reason I say that is the starter Quinones, because we're so far over budget right now, we can't even try to sign people to extensions, and he's looking for 2.6 million. He's a little better than Holloway defensively, but not much of a hitter. Hit just 235 this year, and sadly for us, that's the best batting average he's put up at the major league level in some time, maybe in his entire career. I don't care about his pitching stats. He did hit 268 and 310 in very abbreviated, less than 100 at-bat samples with Atlanta in his mid-20s. So not the best that he's ever hit in the majors, but the best he's ever hit in the majors as a regular player. So probably we'll have Heel, who spent the year in AAA, back on the roster next year, since he's the only catcher that we've got signed. And he's also better defensively than either of these guys, even though he's not quite as good a hitter. Adrian Oliva is going to be one and done with us. We picked him up in that trade with Tampa Bay last offseason. Career 300 hitter, did hit 311 for us. Would have hoped for more home runs than the 6 that he hit in 530 at-bats. Did hit 39 doubles, was a positive OPS plus and WRC plus player. But the 1.1 WAR, I'm not going to lie, was definitely a bit of a disappointment. And he's still looking for not quite as much as he was before the season. But I don't think a 32-year-old singles hitter at first base for $13 million a year is a luxury this team can afford. Tony Cook moved from being our starting second baseman into a utility role this year. Batted just $188. We'll likely have him back next year. Arbitration number is going to be about $2.5 million, but it's conceivable that we could, unfortunately, have to have him back in a starting role next year. In which case, I don't know if we'd happily pay him $2.5 million, but if he ends up needing to be a starter for us, then that's something that we'll have to think about, bringing him back. And we'll talk shortly about why he might end up in a starting role for us. Jose Cuevas is a guy who split the year between AAA and the majors, hit pretty well at both levels. He is not a great defensive infielder, but with that bat, probably going to be on the major league roster for us next year. Victor Serrano, another guy who should be back next year. Didn't hit all that much, 241 batting average, but he's really not here for his bat. He's here for his glove. Was a pretty good defensive second baseman for us this year. Can see his defensive efficiency, very strong. Range, decent for a second baseman. Zone rating was strong. He will be back because he's going to be making $1.5 million next year before he gets to arbitration, and the number probably gets a little bit higher. The question is whether he's going to be playing second base or whether we're going to need to move him to shortstop, and that's the scenario where Tony Cook may end up having a starting job, because our starting shortstop, Luis Linares, who we traded with about a season and a half ago with Kansas City, very good defensive player. And he had a surprisingly productive offensive year for us. Hit 291 with a league best 52 doubles, 112 OPS plus, 111 WRC plus, 4.6 WAR. The issue is his arbitration number is close to $8 million. I don't know that we're going to be able to afford to have Gotti back at around $10.5 million. And then also Linares at close to $8 million. And if we do have to move on from Linares, probably can get something decent for him in a trade, similar to Ochoa. But that may mean that we would move Serrano to shortstop next year and perhaps move Tony Cook back from the bench to be our starting second baseman. The other potential hole that we're going to have is at third base, where Chris Gomez was a average-ish offensive player this year, put up a 2.5 WAR for us, did hit 28 home runs. but he's going to be making around $4 million next year. And I don't know that this team can afford to pay $4 million for a player like Gomez. He does have some pop in the bat. He hit 30 homers for us a couple years ago, and as I mentioned, 28 this past year. But he's a 225, 230 kind of hitter. At best, he's an average-ish offensive player. He's going to be a decision for this offseason also. So between Oliva looking at first base, leaving at first base for sure, and the potential departures of Linares at shortstop and Gomez at third base, the infield is where we're going to have some turnover. Fortunately, for the first time since we kind of started this playthrough, I feel like our outfield is actually pretty well set at this point. Obviously, Isaiah Hill is the man. Rookie of the Year and an MVP in 2039 with a Silver Slugger and an All-Star. Second Silver Slugger, second All-Star award last season. All-Star for the third time in 3 seasons this year. Led the league in home runs and runs batted in. Led the league in slugging percentage and put up a 6.4 WAR. I will have to think that he's going to get a third Silver Slugger award also this season. We did get him signed during the season, as you may remember. We've got him signed for these next 3 years, which would be his arbitration years, at less than his arbitration numbers were expected to be, which is a big win for us in Pittsburgh as we try to remain as competitive as possible for the next few seasons and then deal with whatever we have to deal with after that. But once he gets into those free agency years, 24, 29, 32, 36 million, and then a 40 million player option, it's pretty hard for me to imagine that we're going to have the budget to keep him on the roster by the time he's in his late 20s or early 30s. Obviously would love it if this playthrough goes incredibly. We keep winning, we keep bringing in more fans, we keep getting increases to our budget. But everything's going to have to go just about perfectly for him to be a long-time member of the team. But we'll happily keep him around for as long as we can. Ignacio Carbajal lost his starting center field job this year when we brought on Herrera. We do have him signed for next year at about $3.2 million. Didn't really hit it all this year, just a 208 batting average. You can see the big regression he had in his hitting performance this year. Seems like he's a guy who likes to be in the lineup every day. And he may get that opportunity next year because Herrera is another one of our big decisions and kind of the only big decision we have among the outfielders. His arbitration number is going to be about $7 million next year. If our budget was not an issue, I would certainly bring him back if I had a $150 million payroll. He hit 269, 37 doubles, 6 triples, 23 home runs, drove in 93, scored 89. He's respectable defensively in center field. It's just that when you look at this team and you look at the fact that we've got Linares looking for about $8 million. We've got Gomez looking for about $4 million. We've got Herrera looking for about $7 million. And we're so far over budget, we're going to have to make some difficult decisions. And given that we do already have Carbajal signed for about $3 million, and he's better defensively, even though he's clearly not the same kind of bat as Herrera, Herrera could get caught up in a numbers game, and we may need to trade him away. Feel a little better about potentially being able to do that with the trade for Juan Canseco. Obviously, Canseco with the $199 batting average did not hit the way that we wanted to when we brought him on board to help us in the push for the playoffs. And at this point, he profiles as probably a slightly above average offensive player in a best case scenario. He is going to hit some home runs. He is going to walk a decent amount. Got a good work ethic, and he's very good defensively, even though he's not really a center fielder. And we did get the Dodgers to retain the vast majority of his contract. So we've got him at a real low number next year. So Canseco will be back. Alex Perkins, who could be in the Rookie of the Year conversation, hit 286, 29 homers, 87 ribbies for us. He will be back. And then Alfredo Velasquez, who we talked about at the beginning of the episode when he made the postseason roster, will be back next year also. So as I was commenting, I think even if we move on from Herrera, with Hill as a corner outfielder, Perkins as a corner outfielder, Carbajal as our starting center fielder, and then both Canseco and Velasquez as potential DHs, potential corner outfielders. I feel like we're in better shape in terms of our position players in the outfield than we are in the infield right now, which means I'm probably leaning towards moving on from Herrera. And then if it comes down to Gomez or Linares, even though Linares is making more money at close to $8 million potentially, with the way he hit for us this year in that glove, and the fact that if we keep Linares around, that means we can keep Serrano in his excellent glove at second base, and hopefully keep Cook in a utility role. Although if we move on from Gomez, maybe Cook has to become our third baseman. We've got holes in the infield one way or another, but the thought is if we can only keep one person out of Gomez, Linares, and Herrera ultimately, and we're also going to have to see what we can potentially get in trade for these arbitration-eligible players if we do decide that we're not going to be able to hold on to all of them, because clearly I think Linares will probably have the most trade value. But just in terms of the impact on our team next year, I would say right now I'm leaning, if I can swing the budget to be able to keep one of these players, probably keep Linares and see if what we can get for Gomez and Herrera in trade. Thinking about the pitching staff, try to go all out and keep Gotti at that $10 million arbitration number, which likely means that Ochoa at $6 million is gone. I think we can get something decent for him in trade, so that's not the end of the world. And then Flores, who's not even on the roster, we talked about that. He didn't make the playoff roster at $3.5 million, is almost certainly gone. Not sure what, if anything, we're going to be able to get for him in trade. And then Willie Arenales around $3.5 million. Maybe we can sneak him in also. So we're going to obviously know more when we get closer to arbitration, when the season is officially over, and we find out if we got a bump in our budget, which would clearly make it a little easier to keep the players that I'm talking about, and who knows, maybe even add in another player or two to keep. Taking a look at the accounting at this point, with the close to $4 million in playoff revenue we got from those 2 games in New York, going to have a profit of over $26 million this year for the Pirates. So a 93-69 record, a playoff appearance, a very profitable season, much more revenue generated per game this year than last year, and the fact that we clearly achieved our goal of a winning record, have made huge strides in meeting our attendance goal, and improved stolen bases modestly. I tend to think we'll have a pretty good evaluation from Mr. Nutting at the end of the season, and hopefully that means that we get a bump in our budget. It seems through the first 3 full seasons of this playthrough that a $8 million bump in budget is the most that he'll give us, regardless of how we do financially. This will be a good test of that. I would have to think we're going to get at least the $8 million to 142, and I kind of think that's all we're going to get from Nutting. Clearly, if we get more than that, I the scenarios I just outlined with who we're going to be able to keep and who we're not going to be able to keep among the potential free agents and arbitration eligible players will change a little bit if we have more money. And if we only get an $8 million bump after this year, I think that's a pretty clear sign that that's the best that we're going to be able to do with the penny pinching Nutting as our owner. So we will find out exactly what happens on that front once we're done with the playoffs. And despite the disappointing playoff performance, Luis Longoria was named the NL's best rookie for the month of September. 3-0 record with a 0.84 ERA, 45 strikeouts in 32 innings, and held opponents to a 145 batting average. So we've talked about him a lot, but between both him and Perkins, would think that we're going to be getting votes for both of those players for Rookie of the Year. I don't really know who else was out there as far as the rookies in the NL this year, but feel like definitely we'll have some of the top contenders with Longoria and Perkins, and who knows whether Isaiah Hill will be able to get another MVP award. Tend to think perhaps not. He's behind two guys in batter war. Ricky Ariza with the Mets, shortstop who hit 291. Not a ton of power with no home runs, but did steal 43 bases and is just brilliant defensively, helping him put up that 6.8 WAR. He's certainly in the mix. And then Manny Daniels from the Braves, right fielder, led the league with 121 runs, 267 average, 28 homers, 76 runs batted in, but he did steal 43 bases. It's going to be interesting. Hill should definitely be in the mix. Obviously a monster season, leading the league in homers and runs batted in with that 286 average. He loses a little bit, I think, to the other guys defensively, but his offensive numbers are so big that he certainly is going to be in the mix for MVP. Ricky Gotti probably going to be in the mix for a Cy Young Award. Would tend to think he's not going to get it. 16-10 record with 307 strikeouts for Delgado, leading the league in FIP minus in WAR with the 2.07 Sierra. That looks like a pretty difficult pitching line to overcome. And then Tristan Champion on the Mets, 17-12, led the league in games started, inning pitched, walks per 9 innings. I tend to think it'll probably be Delgado who wins the NL Cy Young Award, but certainly think that Gotti will get some votes. Greg Gaylord probably in the mix for reliever of the year, and as we've talked about, two guys in the mix for rookie of the year. So going to be a interesting award season for the Pirates when we do get there. Looking at the playoff tree, all the wild card series are over now. Yankees will be hosting the Angels, the Astros hosting the Tigers, the Cardinals will be hosting the Mets, and the Nats will be hosting the Atlanta Braves. And we've moved on another round in the playoffs. The Yankees swept the Angels. The Tigers swept the Astros. Nice job, Detroit. Always good to see the Astros lose. The Mets took out the Cardinals 3-1, and the Nationals swept the Braves. So the Yankees and the Nationals are the teams that had the byes that remain. The Tigers, who took out our former team, the Kansas City Royals, and the Mets, who took out our current team, the Pittsburgh Pirates, are the teams that have been moving up through the ranks of the wild card series onto the NL and ALCS. So will we get a Subway Series? Will it be the two wild card teams? Will it be the two favorites? Or will it be the dream matchup of the Detroit Tigers and the Washington Nationals? in the 2041 World Series. And one good piece of news for the Pirates organization, the Indianapolis Indians have moved on to the second round of the AAA playoffs. So some of our top prospects getting some extra action there. And in the major leagues, the chalk won. The Yankees took out the Tigers 4-1, ending their fairy tale season. And the Nationals took out the Mets 4-2. So the New York Yankees and the Washington Nationals will be facing off in the 2041 World Series. And although the Pirates flamed out of the playoffs, the Indianapolis Indians won the championship in AAA. So the first time that they were the champions. So that's good to see. Have some posted players from Japan coming over. Unlikely that we will be able to afford any of these players, even if we wanted them. And it doesn't also look like any of them are really exceptional prospects, according to our scouts. Taking a look at the playoffs, your champions are the New York Yankees. Or no, they're not champions yet. I thought the season was over. I was supposed to be simulating until the end of the season. The Yankees are up 3-2, I guess. And Eddie Chivera, former Kansas City Royal. I can't believe they let him go after all Eddie Chivera had done for those Kansas City Royals when we picked him up years ago in that big trade for Maxime De La Cruz, who became a big-time hitter. But Eddie Chivera had that great run with Kansas City. Very good starter for them for all those seasons, including those last 3 world championships that we won when we were general manager over there. And he's continued to be a pretty effective pitcher for the Yankees. And he will be going for the win today as they're up 3-2. Or I guess it will be tomorrow. And the Yankees did clinch. Wonder how Chivera did. Was not involved in the decision. 7-3 victory, so he clearly didn't pitch horribly, but it looks like they must have scored their runs in the later innings against the bullpen. But the New York Yankees are your 2041 World Series champions. And we'll be moving on to the start of the offseason tomorrow to figure out whether the Pittsburgh Pirates can at least be the offseason champions this year. A big step in that direction would be a nice boost to our budget. I'm guessing it's only going to be $8 million. It seems like that's the most that Nutting will give us. But if there's ever a year when it might be more than that, a great financial year with a really good record, playoff appearance, and doing pretty good in the owner goals is probably the way to make it happen. So as I said earlier, this will be a good test of exactly what, if anything, Mr. Nutting is able to give us as far as bumps in the budget. And with the number of free agents and the number of arbitration-eligible players we're going to have, most of whom we talked through when we were kind of doing the recap of the season, every penny that we have to spend is going to be a asset for this team. Let's find out. A lot going on here to read about as we get to the end of the episode. Bobby Gonzalez, we need that option year decision, team option for $3.8 million. He is still a good starting pitcher. No question what we want to do with Mr. Gonzalez. We are going to execute that option, bring him back for $3.8 million. We'll look at the less interesting stuff first. Arbitration underway. Offseason begins. Top prospects listed, and Angel Aguilar listed as the number 6 prospect in baseball. Have some personnel leaving, hitting coach, a couple of hitting coaches in the low minors. manager in AA. Moving on from team trainer Jorge Balderrama, who was on a 1-year deal with us. We're still trying to find a great trainer, so until we can find a great trainer available via, I guess, free agency at the end of the season, we've just been signing the best person we can find when he's not a true stud to 1-year contracts to kind of tide us over. And then who's going to retire? This could be a shock to the system here. Pitching coach Aaron Taylor retired. Okay, he was a pretty good pitching coach for us. Obviously, we kept him around for several years. The only thing we do have going for us is that, as you know, if you've been watching me, we try to hire the most qualified and best coaches possible throughout our minor league system. So obviously we can go on the open market to potentially fill that role as a pitching coach, but I think we certainly have several very good options within our farm system and probably have some good pitching coaches who might even be wanting promotions at this point. So we should have some options there. Take a look at the review of the season goals. Pleased that we made the playoffs. Satisfied with our improvement in steals. Happy that we're getting more people out. Wants us to be a contender for the championship. Happy with our performance and our handling of the team. Wants us to reach the playoffs again next year. Upgrade at second base. Acquire a team leader. Continue to increasing attendance. And we also need to reach the World Series next season. So no pressure at all. No pressure at all from Mr. Nutting. And what type of budget are you going to give us for next year to accomplish these simple goals that you've laid out, Robert? $144 million. I should know offhand what that means. It was actually bigger than I thought. We found out that we can get more than an $8 million bump from Robert Nutting. He gave us a $10 million bump. As I said, I think just about everything went right that season, this past season, as far as the record on the field, the attendance, the increase in revenue per game. In fact, we had a couple playoff games to really deliver a really big profit to him. But you can see with the fact that at this point, it looks like some of our arbitration numbers have actually gone up a little bit to 101.6 million. So we're going to have, Ricky Gotti's number went up to 13 million from the 10.5 that we had thought it was going to be. Not a shock, unfortunately. So that's not optimal, but we do have $10 million more to spend. But you can see we still have no money for free agents at this point, just because that play roll right now is going to be $101 million, which means that we're going to need to pare back those scouting and development budgets somewhat just to open up some cash to play with this offseason. We'll make those changes now. I hope we're going to be able to, you can see they're taking away the money to just ensure that we can pay the bills. Ooh, you're killing us. And we're not even at the right draft slot amount. So, we're going to have to move on from some of these players because as much as I'd love to keep them around, keep them all around, just not going to be practical. But we'll at least put in minimal placeholders, and you can see if we were to pare the scouting budget back by $8 million and pare the development budget back by $22 million, that would still only leave us with $2.3 million for free agents right now, a little over $5 million for extensions. So we're going to have some tough decisions to make when the offseason begins. Clearly not going to be able to bring back all of the arbitration-eligible players. The $10 million bump does give us a fighting chance to hopefully keep 2, 3, maybe 4 of them if everything plays out perfectly. But we're going to want some money for the off season also, because as I talked about, even in a best case scenario, we're probably going to be open up a couple holes in our bullpen. And even in a best case scenario, we've probably got a hole at catcher and a hole or two, certainly at least one hole in the infield at first base, and almost certainly a hole in the infield at third base, and still a possibility that we have a hole in the infield at second base or shortstop. So, we're going to have to pair not just enough salary to, kind of get the money for free agents down to zero, but we're going to have to pair enough salary that we're going to be able, so that we'll be able to sign, a few players this off season too. And as I mentioned, I'd also like to be in a situation where the scouting and development budgets are not as low as they are right now. So we've got a lot of big decisions to make when this 2041 to 2042 offseason kicks off, which it officially has. And we will focus on those decisions in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.